A dimly lit NASA conference room, 1982. The air is thick with the scent of stale coffee and anxiety. On a projection screen, a slide displays an ambitious, sprawling lattice structure against the black of space labeled Space Station Freedom. This is the dream, a permanent human outpost in the heavens. But on the whiteboard next to it, scrawled in urgent red marker, is the dream's potential killer: power. Required lifespan, 15+ years. Current max, 5 to 7 years. Unattainable. The problem hangs in the air, a declaration of technological failure before the first piece of metal is even forged. The most brilliant minds in aerospace engineering are staring at a wall. To keep a city in orbit lit and alive through 35 minutes of freezing darkness every 90 minutes for over a decade requires an energy storage system that does not yet exist. Every known battery chemistry buckles, degrades, and dies under the brutal, unforgiving cycle of space. The dream of the International Space Station is on the verge of being grounded by a single catastrophic limitation. Into this high-stakes impasse walks a young chemical engineer from Patillas, Puerto Rico, named Olga González-Sanabria. She had arrived at the NASA Lewis Research Center in 1979, a graduate of the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez, entering a world overwhelmingly white and male. It was an institution still running on the fumes of Apollo-era bravado, a culture where your credentials were often judged by your accent or your gender before your intellect. For a Latina from the islands, navigating this environment required not just brilliance, but a resilient and unyielding fortitude. Her journey wasn't just geographical, it was a cultural and professional odyssey against prevailing currents. She was assigned to the station's power division, specifically to the problem of energy storage. It was considered a backwater assignment by some, a thankless, dead-end task of incremental improvements. No one was expecting a revolution. They were just hoping for a miracle. The challenge was monumental, a puzzle of physics and chemistry at its most extreme. The space station would be a colossal energy consumer, with life support, communications, and countless scientific experiments all demanding a constant, uninterrupted flow of electricity. While in sunlight, massive solar arrays would provide more than enough power, but each orbit would plunge the station into the Earth's shadow. For that 35-minute eclipse, the station would have to run on batteries. These weren't just any batteries. They had to be the most reliable, robust, and long-lasting energy storage devices ever conceived by humanity. They needed to endure a thermal shock unlike anything on Earth, swinging from the blistering heat of direct sunlight to the cryogenic cold of deep space. They had to withstand the vacuum, which can cause materials to outgas and degrade, and the constant bombardment of atomic oxygen that corrodes surfaces. Most critically, they had to survive an unprecedented number of charge-discharge cycles. A typical satellite battery at the time was designed for a few thousand cycles over its 5 to 7 year life. The space station demanded at least 60,000 cycles to meet its 15-year goal. Every existing technology failed catastrophically short of this mark. Failing battery test. The most promising candidate was the nickel-hydrogen battery. It was powerful and less prone to the memory effect that plagued nickel-cadmium cells. But it had a fatal flaw. Its cycle life was abysmal. After just a few thousand cycles, performance would plummet. The internal components would break down, leading to short circuits and failure. The entire industry had hit a wall, and that wall was a single paper-thin component deep inside the battery cell, the separator. This porous membrane, responsible for keeping the positive and negative electrodes from touching while allowing ions to flow, was the system's Achilles heel. The standard material, a form of asbestos, would physically degrade, shed particles, and lose its ability to hold the potassium hydroxide electrolyte, starving the battery of its lifeblood. The problem was so fundamental that many senior engineers at NASA and in the private sector had begun to argue that the 15-year station was a fantasy. Memos circulated, suggesting a redesign for a shorter lifespan or a reliance on prohibitively expensive, constantly replaced battery modules. The systemic resistance was building, not out of malice, but out of a pragmatic acceptance of perceived limits. The dream of the ISS was being quietly dismantled by the limitations of material science. Olga González-Sanabria was assigned to lead the team tackling this unsolvable separator problem. It was a project with immense pressure and little glory, the kind of deep internal engineering that never makes headlines, but upon which entire multi-billion-dollar missions depend. She was tasked with inventing a new material from scratch, one that could do the impossible. The future of continuous human presence in space, the fate of a project that would define international cooperation for a generation, rested on the work happening in her small lab in Ohio. As the wider world debated the politics and grandeur of a station in the stars, the project's very existence was being decided by a quiet battle against chemistry and physics. Could one engineer, leading a small team against the weight of industry consensus, truly invent the heartbeat for a home in the cosmos? To answer that question, we have to step inside Olga's lab at the NASA Glenn Research Center, where the fate of orbital power was being decided not with grand gestures, but with microscopic precision. This wasn't the glamorous world of mission control rooms and astronaut training pools. This was the painstaking, methodical world of material science. The air hummed with the low thrum of vacuum pumps and the click of sensitive electronic measurement tools. It was a world of electron microscopes, chemical beakers, and thermal chambers designed to simulate the most hostile environment known to man. Here, progress was measured in microns and milliamps. Olga and her team were not just trying to improve a battery, they were trying to redefine the very limits of what a battery could be. Their focus was laser sharp. The separator, that humble, porous membrane that had become the single point of failure for the entire energy system of the future International Space Station. The science of the separator is deceptively complex. It acts as both a barrier and a bridge. It must be an electrical insulator, preventing the nickel hydroxide cathode and the hydrogen gas-infused anode from touching, which would cause an immediate and catastrophic short circuit. Yet it must also be a sponge, saturated with a highly corrosive potassium hydroxide electrolyte, allowing hydroxide ions to flow freely between the electrodes. This ionic flow is the very essence of the battery's charge and discharge cycle. The material needed to be chemically inert, refusing to react with the caustic electrolyte or the volatile gases inside the cell. It had to be physically robust, withstanding the compression of assembly and the expansion and contraction of the electrodes over tens of thousands of cycles. And it had to do all of this flawlessly for over a decade in a zero-gravity, high-radiation environment. The old asbestos separators simply couldn't. It was a brilliant material for its time, but it was fundamentally weak, breaking down and losing its sponge-like properties over time. The breakthrough separator material. Olga's approach was a masterclass in methodical innovation. Instead of searching for a single perfect material, she began experimenting with composites, blending the properties of different substances to create something entirely new. The team began investigating various polymers and ceramics, materials known for their stability but often difficult to work with. They tested polysulfones, Teflons, and various inorganic fibers. Each candidate was subjected to a brutal gauntlet of tests designed to simulate and accelerate 15 years of orbital life. They were soaked in electrolyte at high temperatures to test for chemical degradation. They were put into test cells and run through thousands of rapid charge-discharge cycles to check for physical breakdown. The evidence from these early experiments was clear. No single material possessed the perfect combination of properties. A new path was needed. The breakthrough came from combining the flexibility of a polymer with the incredible durability of a ceramic. Olga spearheaded the development of a separator made from a web of zirconium oxide fibers bound together with a polysulfone binder. This was revolutionary. The zirconium oxide provided unparalleled chemical stability, acting as a rock-solid, non-reactive skeleton. The polymer provided the structural integrity and the necessary porosity, creating a tortuous sponge-like path for the ions to travel. This innovation, however, was met with significant internal resistance. The engineering world, especially in a high-reliability field like aerospace, is inherently conservative. The mantra is, if it works, don't change it. And even though the old system worked well enough, proposing something so novel was a risk. Peers and senior managers raised legitimate concerns. Could this complex composite material be manufactured consistently at scale? Would the binder degrade over time, even if the ceramic fibers didn't? How could they be certain it would last 15 years when their accelerated tests only simulated a fraction of that time? The burden of proof was entirely on Olga and her team. They had to be more than right. They had to be irrefutable. So they built more test cells. They ran more cycles. They meticulously documented every data point, building a mountain of evidence. They refined the manufacturing process, developing techniques to ensure every separator that came off the line was identical. ISS power grid schematic. The results were undeniable. The new zirconium oxide separator didn't just meet the requirements, it shattered them. Test cells using her design were cycling 40,000, 50,000, then over 60,000 times with minimal degradation. The long cycle life nickel-hydrogen battery was born. This wasn't an incremental improvement. It was the enabling technology that made the International Space Station a viable long-term project. The unsolvable problem on the whiteboard was solved. The red unattainable could be erased. The impact was immediate and profound. The designs for the station's electrical power system could be finalized. Contracts could be signed with manufacturers. The dream of a permanent city in the sky moved from blueprint to reality, its financial and logistical viability secured by a component no bigger than a sheet of paper perfected in a lab in Ohio. The batteries were built, integrated into the station's truss structures, and launched into orbit. They worked. And they are still working today, quietly and flawlessly keeping the lights on. But as the ISS became a symbol of global achievement, a shining beacon in the night sky, a critical question lingered in the background, lost in the roar of rocket launches and the celebration of astronauts. Whose name was attached to its very heartbeat? That question of attribution is where science often becomes history, and where history often becomes a story of erasure. In the vast bureaucratic machinery of an organization like NASA, individual credit can be a slippery concept. Innovations are rarely the product of a lone genius in a flash of insight. They are the result of teams, of years of methodical work, of building on the failures and successes of others. Patents for work done at a federal agency are typically assigned to the U.S. government, not the individual inventor. Technical papers are published with a long list of authors, where project managers and department heads often get prominent placement over the hands-on engineers who did the foundational work. The contribution of Olga González-Sanabria, as critical as it was absorbed into the collective entity known simply as NASA. The public narrative, by its very nature, simplifies. We celebrate the astronauts who walk in space, the mission commanders who guide the ships. We don't tell stories about the material scientists who formulated the battery separator, or the software engineers who coded the life support algorithms. The system itself, by its structure, pushes the vital foundational work of engineers like Olga into the background. Yet, the evidence of her impact is undeniable and orbits 250 miles above our heads every single day. The International Space Station has been continuously inhabited by humans since November 2000. This incredible achievement, over 2 decades of unbroken presence in the most hostile environment imaginable, is a direct testament to the reliability of its core systems. The power system, built around the long cycle life battery she made possible, has performed with near-perfect fidelity. Every single one of the thousands of experiments conducted on the ISS, every piece of data collected, every discovery made, is fundamentally dependent on that steady, reliable flow of electricity during the orbital night. The alpha magnetic spectrometer, searching for dark matter, needs continuous power for its superconducting magnet. The experiments growing protein crystals in microgravity, leading to new drug designs, require stable temperatures and power for weeks on end. The studies on human physiology, bone density loss, and muscle atrophy that are paving the way for future missions to Mars all rely on the station's life support and monitoring equipment, which cannot afford a single power failure. Science on the ISS. Olga's work wasn't just a component in a battery, it was the silent, invisible foundation for a generation of scientific progress. Her career continued to flourish within NASA. She didn't rest on her technical laurels. She rose through the ranks, eventually becoming the director of engineering at the Glenn Research Center, one of the highest-ranking Hispanic women at the agency. She became a mentor, a leader, and a role model, championing STEM education and paving the way for others. She received prestigious internal awards, like the Presidential Rank Award for Meritorious Executives, a significant honor within the federal service. But this is recognition, the system. It is not the same as public acknowledgement or a place in the historical narrative of the great scientific achievements of our time. Her story is a powerful lens through which to view a much larger, systemic issue. How many other hidden figures are there? The history of science and technology is filled with individuals, particularly women and people of color, whose foundational contributions have been overlooked, misattributed, or simply absorbed by the institutions they worked for. We are complicit in this erasure when we accept the simplified, great man version of history. Who benefits when a breakthrough is credited to a faceless agency instead of the tenacious engineer who willed it into existence? How many potential cures, technologies, and discoveries have been delayed or lost because a brilliant mind was denied resources, respect, or a seat at the table? This is why we must actively work to restore the narrative. It is not about diminishing the collective achievement, but about completing it by giving faces and names to the work. It's about ensuring that a young girl in Patillas, Puerto Rico, or anywhere else can see a reflection of herself not just as a user of technology, but as its creator. By unearthing and celebrating the story of Olga González-Sanabria, we do more than give a forgotten hero her due. We paint a more accurate, more inspiring, and more honest picture of how progress is actually made, through persistence, collaboration, and the quiet, unrecognized brilliance of individuals who refuse to accept the word unattainable. Olga González-Sanabria's portrait. Her legacy is not a static entry in a dusty archive. It is a living, working marvel circling our planet 16 times a day. The next time you look up and see that bright, fast-moving star streak across the night sky, remember it is more than a satellite. It is a home, a laboratory, and a monument to human cooperation. And remember the quiet, determined engineer whose work keeps its heart beating, a constant reminder of the unseen power that drives our greatest ambitions forward.